So audience research and audience development are an absolutely crucial part of museum practice. It can be so easy to let it go by the wayside when there's so much else to do, but it's something that should be part of everyday museum practice. And once it's embedded in your organisation, it'll feel a lot easier. It really shouldn't feel like an extra thing to do or a burden. Everything you do should start with audience research, knowing who your audience are, and knowing how to create products that meet their needs, whether that be exhibitions, events, collections development, marketing, and everything else besides. So you really need to start by knowing who your audience is. So their demographics, their interests, what local schools there are, what curriculum is taught, for example, and also know why people are visiting. And then think, who would you like your audience to be? And are there any audience groups that don't currently visit who you'd like to engage with? Then carry out your research. So think about how you're going to do that. Are you going to do surveys, focus groups, interviews? Are you going to collect research on site? There's lots of different things you can do that will be in this toolkit. So look around for inspiration, think about what works best for you and also what works best for your audience. Do they have a lot of time and can fill in a big survey, or are they really short of time and might just want to do something really, really quick on site? And also think about whether, if you want non-visitors to complete the research, really think about how you're going to reach those people, because they're obviously not going to be on site and it might be a bit more tricky to reach them. So doing things like surveys with incentives can really help to reach those people. So find out what each of your audiences looks like. What do they think about your museum? What are their needs, their interests? What are they really interested about in terms of your collection? And then when you have your audience segments, so exactly which audiences visit and which audience you'd like to visit the museum, look at those together with colleagues. Think about each audience segment. So for example, one might be local young people. Think about, what does a typical day look like for them? What are their interests? What marketing channels do they use? What are they looking for in a day out? What do they need from you online and on site to make their experience as good as possible? If you really, really dig down into your audience segments, then you can come up with really, really comprehensive information about each of your audiences that you can then use whatever you're doing. So whether you're doing a new exhibition or some new events, marketing, or you redeveloping the shop or the cafe, everything should start with who those audiences are, what are their needs, and what do they want, and what will make their experience at your museum the best thing it could possibly be. So when you're doing your audience research, it's really important to find out what collections and stories really interest each audience group. And it's also key to find out what might interest audiences who don't know that much about your specific collection. A few years ago now, I did a piece of audience research as a freelance consultant for a large museum that was looking at how to engage people in a collection and stories that weren't that well known. So the history wasn't taught on the curriculum. It's not a very well known subject, and the collections were not that easy to engage with or access. So we talked to each audience group about that story. We showed them the relevant collections and we asked them which part of the story was of most interest to them. I really think that it's possible to engage audience with stories that they're not familiar with. It's just finding what really makes them tick and what really interests them about a particular story. There's always ways into a collection, and by talking to your audiences, you can find out what those ways in are. When you start the research, you need to know what your aims are. So what do you really, really want to find out? And then really crucially, you need to act on the research. It's so easy to conduct research and then it goes in a drawer and it's lost forever. And then it's just been a waste of time and you're not serving your audience's needs and you're ultimately not doing the best you can for your museum. Because the reason we're doing audience research is to democratize museums, to give lots of people a say in museums, to find out, what your audiences really want. And in finding out that, then you become more resilient and sustainable because you know that you're creating products that people will actually want and need and that fill a need, rather than just doing things kind of in a bit more out of the blue and a bit more randomly that you're not really sure whether they'll work or not. So make sure you act on the research. When the research is complete, share it with staff and volunteers. and collect ideas on what the implications of the research are. So what can you do to make your museum and the collections more appealing to each audience in the short, medium and long term? And also think about what budget you can allocate to it and what's the time scale. You know, there are lots of things that you might be able to do as a really quick, easy win. And there are other things that might take a couple of years, but have that plan ready. So the research actually turns into a practical action plan. That's really, really important. Ultimately, you know, museums have to first and foremost serve their audiences and meet the needs of audiences, or we risk not getting visitors or getting repeat visitors. And we also risk losing a good reputation. Being confident that we're meeting visitor needs is really important. It helps to ensure that we're not wasting money on things that don't meet visitor needs. It shows visitors that we genuinely care about what they want. And it ensures that our collections, displays, and events are relevant to audiences. And it is really important to do regular research because visitor needs change and we need to be flexible to meet those changing needs. And also, as your museum progresses, you know, museums don't just stand still, do they? They have to adapt. And you might find that actually, you know, 5 years in the future, you want to change your target audiences. And so it's really important to make sure that you're continually doing research so you know what your current audiences want from you. So we did a project in 2020 at the National Football Museum. We did a large visitor research project. At that point, it had been quite a while since we'd undertaken very large scale and in-depth audience research. We do a visitor survey every year, but it had been a while since we'd done really, really in-depth research. And so it was time to kind of take a step back and find out more about our audiences, who visits at the moment, and then also who doesn't visit. We wanted to understand for visitors why they visit. We also wanted to know why people don't visit. What their interests are, and what will encourage them to visit and engage with our collection. So we did know things about our audience before we started the research. You know, we'd done regular research through surveys, and obviously, you know, working at a museum or volunteering at a museum, you do get a good knowledge of visitors just by simply observing them and talking to them, which I think is just standard practice. So we did have quite a good understanding of who our audiences were, but we really wanted to sense check that and get some good, robust evidence to back up our assumptions. You know, as museum staff or volunteers, you will have a good sense of who's visiting and who's engaging and what they like and don't like. But it's really good practice to check that by conducting robust research. So you're not just making assumptions, and it's actually based on evidence. When I've done audience research in the past, both as a consultant, which I did for 9 years, and working in house jobs as well, through doing audience research, I've always found something that's really surprising or that I've not considered. And I think you really miss out on that if you don't ask visitors themselves. There's always something that will jump out at you and you'll think, that's really interesting. We've not thought about that, and now we can act on that. Sometimes also audience research will simply back up what you already thought, but it's really empowering to know that you now have that position, that evidence to know that that your position is correct and you can build from that. Until you've done the research, it is always an assumption. And that's not saying that the assumptions are wrong, but it's really good to have the evidence to know that you can confidently move forward thinking, yeah, this is who our audiences are. These are their needs. This is what they enjoy. And this is how we can best develop our museum and our online offer to meet their needs. So we actually worked with an external consultancy, an international visitor experience consultancy called The Different View, to conduct the visitor research. Of course, visitor research can also be conducted in-house, and I've worked in the past with museums who've done both, or even a hybrid of the two, so some being conducted by in-house staff and some being conducted by an external consultant. But at the museum, we decided to invest in external support to gain extra expertise and also to gain a bit of a fresh perspective, and to work with a company who could take a bit more of a neutral stance about our offer, and also to give us extra capacity in order to kind of boost that in-house capacity. So A Different View created in-depth online surveys for visitors and non-visitors. 977 people completed the surveys in total. And it really helped to offer an incentive. So we were really lucky that we were able to offer £300 in cash, which is obviously a lot, but it really helped to get people to complete the survey. Because ultimately, you're asking people to give up their time. It can be really difficult to get people who've never visited your museum before to fill in a survey about a museum they don't know and they've not visited. So the surveys had some similar themes. They looked at like demographics and people's interests. But the non-visitor survey also included photographs of the museum. So non-visitors had the chance to kind of look around the museum virtually, and then they were able to offer their opinion of the museum based on what they saw. So they were asked, would you visit? Is this somewhere of interest? And that also actually acted as a great marketing tool, because it meant that we were showing, 526 people a museum that they'd not visited. And many of them said that they wanted to visit now they'd seen what we looked like. So actually, that's the other great thing about surveys, that they can also kind of increase your reach and engagement and help you reach people who may not have engaged before. So we learned loads and loads of things from the survey, which was all really interesting. Like, I'm really proud that, our visitors based and non-visitors said they really loved the museum, which was great. And they felt it was really good value for money. And that was really great to hear. We didn't start charging for admission that long ago. And it was really great to hear that people felt that, we were good value for money. And actually, many people said they'd pay more to come and visit us, which was great to hear and quite surprising, I think, because it's easy to undervalue yourself, I think, as a museum. They were very likely to think it's an interesting, fun, informative and exciting museum. And again, that was really great to learn. And it was great. We asked a question. We know that because we asked a question for people to describe the museum in 3 words. And when the data came out, it was really interesting to see what words people used to describe the museum. And then we talked to the staff team about what words would you like people to describe the museum as. So they described it as interesting, fun, exciting, informative, all really brilliant words. But we'd also really like people in the future to describe it as stimulating and inspiring and active. And so we're thinking of ways to change the experience a little bit to make sure that in the future, in 5 years' time, for example, people will describe the museum in other ways than they do now. We learned as well that, and this might not feel anything kind of revelatory, but we found that people who like football really like the museum. And again, that might not seem like revelation, but I think working with sporting collections, it's easy to just make assumptions about who your audiences are. It's also really easy to think, well, unless people like this sport, they won't want to come. And what we actually found is that the more visitors like football, the more they're likely to visit the museum. So everyone was asked how much they like football, to kind of not caring about it at all, to being absolutely obsessed with it. And we define that as, like 5 or more times a week, you'll be reading about football or talking about football, engaging with football in some way. So the people that said they were really obsessed with football liked the museum more than people who said, we really like football, but we're not obsessed with it. And so because in the population, there are more people who, really, really like football, myself included, but aren't absolutely obsessed with it and kind of it's their main hobby and they, spend a lot of time consuming football and reading football articles. We're looking at doing a bit more to engage football fans who really like the game, but wouldn't describe themselves as being obsessed with it. And that's been a really interesting challenge and something that we're going to keep thinking about in the future. We found out that lots of people know about the museum through word of mouth, which was great because it means that we're getting recommendations from people who are visiting. And we also found, we found basically it's a really great product that people like, but there are things to build on. And that was a great thing to learn. Because especially I think last year when everything was so difficult and we were shut like many museums for a lot of the year, it was really great and a boost to hear that people really like what we're doing. And then there are things that we can build on in the future. So we found out that people aged under 35 weren't quite as engaged. So we're going to be looking at telling more contemporary stories that are within their living memory. And that's going to feed into our collecting program, and we're going to do more contemporary collecting. And also that we want to do a bit more for under fives. We have a really great family offer. People recognise that, but they said when they bring under fives, that even though we do have a really great offer for under fives, not as many people know about that. So we're going to look at ways to, build that into the whole experience. So making sure the shop, the cafe, the displays, the events are, are for really, really multi-generational. But as I said, the main thing we found out was that people really like it, and there's lots to build on and be encouraged about. And that was a really great message to be able to talk to the staff about as well, that they're doing an amazing job. And, it's a real boost to find out that people really like what you're doing. So as I said before, it is really important that the work that you do then leads to action, or it's just research on its own. So the work we've done is feeding into strategies going forward. We're writing a new marketing strategy and a content strategy. In the Football Museum, the content is collections, exhibitions, and programming. They've been really heavily influenced by the findings of the audience research. We've also come up with new audience segments, which has been fantastic. And it's feeding into a gallery's transformation plan that's being written. As I said, we created visitor personas based on the audiences that we identified from the research, and we're using that to support work going forward. So thinking about marketing to those groups. We've recently had photographs taken that represent people in those groups. So, other people in those groups can see that it's a place for them. And we've also used the research to write successful funding bids. And we're going to keep doing that. And that's another reason I think visitor research is so important, because funders really want that robust evidence. And it's great to be able to say, we found this, and so we'd really like funding to help improve this, because we know that will support a visitor need. And funders are so much more likely to fund things that they know there's a need for. Just thinking about some kind of top tips, if you're starting out in audience research and development, I think it is really important to know what you're trying to find out, know why you're doing it, have a plan. That should start with it. Everything should start with having a plan. You need to know, why you're doing this, what you're trying to find out. Are you trying to find out, about a specific program, what people think about a particular exhibition? Is it about, your whole museum experience? Is it about your collections? Know what you're trying to find out, so you ask the right questions, and then know why you're doing it as well, and how you're going to do it, whether you're going to do it in-house, whether you're going to work with an external consultant. Have that really strong plan in place, and that helps everything go a lot more smoothly. Pick the right methods of visitor research. So think about what works best for your audience. Is there more than one method that you might use? I said that should all be part of your plan. Allocate resource and budget to doing this. So I know that, money is very, very tight, and so it might be that you do something really small in-house. What I'd say is it is helpful to allocate some budget, at least to, offer an incentive, to potentially bring in a consultant even if just for a couple of days, to give you some advice if you've never done this before. And it's also helpful to have budget for the action part of the plan. So once you've got the research, and then you have a list of things that you need to do as a result of the research, even if it's like a couple of £100, for example, if you found out that people want more for, under 10s in your museum, for example, or more for young people, pull together a working group, staff and volunteers, trustees, and you can say, okay, we've got £200 or £500 or £1,000. What are we going to do to make sure that we really improve the offer for that group? And then it feels like you're turning research into action, and it's something that you can do quite quickly and have a bit of an easy win. It's really important to feel like it's quickly lead into action. Or as I said, it can feel like, a few months later, you can be down the line thinking, why did we do that research? It's not led to anything. Then also, if you've never done audience research before, there are so many great resources. Watch this toolkit, the Sporting Heritage Toolkit. It's fantastic, and is a really comprehensive guide to audience research and development. And also talk to other people who've done it. The museum sector is a really sharing sector, I think, and everybody's happy to help and share what they've done. So don't be afraid to ask. please always feel free to contact me. I'm always happy to help, and I know others are as well. And good luck with it. You know, as I said, build it into your everyday practice. Don't just see this as, you know, we do audience research once and then we don't do it again. It's something that, you know, if you build into everyday practice, you can keep feeding audience research into what you're doing and make sure that your offer stays relevant and contemporary and keeps meeting the needs of your audiences, which ultimately is great for your museum because people will keep visiting, they'll keep recommending it to friends, and it will help your museum to really thrive. So good luck with it.